One of the biggest retail chains in the United States, Costco, is suing the Trump administration over tariffs. Costco is the latest company to launch legal action against Trump's signature economic policy. It's asking the Court of International Trade to consider declaring the use of an emergency measure to collect the tariffs unlawful, and is seeking a full refund if the Supreme Court strikes down the tariffs.
Costco just did something no one expected. It turned on Donald Trump's economic agenda and dragged his tariff regime into court. One of America's biggest retail giants is now suing the Trump administration, arguing that the emergency-powered tariffs Trump imposed may not even be legal. And here's the contrast that Americans don't want to admit. While the United States is now tangled in lawsuits, constitutional questions, and corporate revolt, Canada is standing steady, strategic, calm, and quietly gaining ground. The divide between the two countries has never been clearer. Trump's America is locked in economic self-sabotage, while Canada is moving forward with confidence and vision.
The story erupted when Costco filed a lawsuit at the U.S. Court of International Trade. The company wants the court to declare Trump's tariffs unlawful, and it's asking for a full refund if the Supreme Court strikes them down. That's not a minor request. It's a direct challenge to Trump's core economic weapon. This case didn't appear out of nowhere. The tariffs in question were imposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, a law historically reserved for sanctions and national security emergencies, not routine trade pressure. Even before Costco acted, the Supreme Court had already begun reviewing whether a president can use that act to unilaterally impose sweeping tariffs on allies and adversaries alike. During oral arguments, several justices, including conservative ones, openly questioned whether Trump may have exceeded his authority. So now the U.S. faces two parallel battles, one in the Supreme Court, testing the limits of presidential power, and another in the lower court, where companies like Costco are lining up to demand compensation. It's a legal storm entirely of America's own making.
Costco's lawsuit is more than a corporate complaint. It's evidence that Trump's signature economic strategy is cracking from within. Billions of dollars in tariffs have been collected through emergency authority, and if the Supreme Court rules against him, the federal government may be forced to return huge amounts of money. That would be a budgetary shock and a political humiliation all at once. But the deeper issue is this: American companies are no longer silently absorbing the damage. They're fighting back. Retailers, manufacturers, farmers, the very people Trump claims to be protecting, are arguing that these tariffs do more harm than good. What began as a trade war against foreign competitors has become a civil war inside the U.S. economy. And every lawsuit, every court hearing, pushes the country further into uncertainty. Canada's position could not be more different. While Washington battles itself, Ottawa has taken a measured and strategic approach to the global economy. Prime Minister Mark Carney has been clear that Canada refuses to be intimidated by tariffs, and instead of escalating conflict, his government has strengthened ties across Asia, Europe, and the Indo-Pacific. Canada is shaping new partnerships with South Korea, Japan, and the European Union, while expanding strategies in clean energy, critical minerals, technology, and defense. The more erratic the U.S. becomes, the more attractive Canada looks to global investors. The contrast is stark. Where America is unpredictable, Canada is steady. Where the U.S. swings between aggressive tariffs and internal lawsuits, Canada presents a coherent long-term vision. The irony is that Trump's aggression only accelerates Canada's diversification, exactly the opposite of what he intended. Costco's decision to sue the U.S. government sends a signal that Ottawa could never send itself. It shows that the instability in North America comes not from Canada resisting U.S. pressure, but from the U.S. government fighting its own business community. Canada doesn't need to argue that Trump's tariffs are misguided. Costco is doing it for them. And Costco is not alone. Across the United States, companies are quietly preparing for the Supreme Court ruling, hoping for refunds and regulatory clarity that Washington can't promise.
While America wrestles with constitutional questions about executive power, Canada is presenting itself as the reliable partner in a region facing turbulence. Canada is winning trust not through confrontation, but through stability. And this stability is now becoming one of Canada's strongest competitive advantages. In international summits, Canada is increasingly seen as a safe harbor in a volatile era. Foreign investors, observing the legal and political wars consuming Washington, are shifting capital northward, not out of emotion, but out of rational calculation. Canada's institutions function. Its trade policy is predictable. Its leadership projects calm instead of chaos. These conditions matter. They shape long-term decisions about factories, supply chains, research hubs, and energy projects. Costco's lawsuit doesn't just expose American volatility, it reinforces Canada's reputation as the country that gets things right.
Everything now hinges on the Supreme Court's review of Trump's tariff authority. If the court rules that Trump exceeded his power, his entire tariff architecture could collapse overnight. That would trigger a wave of demands for refunds, a political crisis for the administration, and a scramble to rebuild the United States trade framework. And what would Canada be doing during all of this? Moving forward, strengthening new export channels, building energy and mineral alliances, positioning itself as the country that global partners can depend on. Trump's tariffs were designed to intimidate Canada into concessions. Instead, they've exposed how fragile and legally vulnerable the U.S. system has become. And the deeper Canada looks into this unfolding crisis, the clearer the opportunity becomes. If the U.S. loses its legal footing, companies that rely on predictable tariff regimes will begin searching for markets governed by clarity rather than chaos. Canada's regulatory environment, its stable rule of law tradition, and its ability to strike long-term agreements without political whiplash place it in a uniquely advantageous position. In effect, the Supreme Court's decision may do what years of diplomacy could not: push global investment toward Canada simply because it offers what the U.S. currently cannot: certainty, consistency, and competence.
Costco's lawsuit marks a turning point. It's the moment when Trump's tariff strategy stopped being an external weapon and became an internal liability. The United States is battling itself over the very tools it uses to pressure its allies, while Canada stands firm, stable, and increasingly influential. Two systems, two directions, one trapped in a storm of its own creation, one calmly building a new economic future. As the Supreme Court prepares its ruling, the central question is no longer whether Trump can pressure Canada, it's whether the United States can even control its own economic machinery. And if America is fighting itself, how can it ever hope to dominate a country that refuses to be shaken?
So far, we know 5 of the new ones. 3 are critical mineral mines, 1 in Quebec, 1 in Ontario, and 1 in New Brunswick. Critical mineral extraction is a priority for this government. In the recent budget, it earmarked $2 billion for the sector over 5 years.
Canada is home to some of the largest reserves of critical minerals in the world. We have lithium, nickel, cobalt, copper, and rare earth elements. They're all widely available here.
Canada just made a move that Washington can't brush off. While Donald Trump doubles down on tariffs and shouts about restoring American manufacturing, Ottawa has quietly taken control of the one resource that could decide the future of the entire electric vehicle race: nickel. And thanks to Prime Minister Mark Carney's new federal budget, Canada is no longer just supplying nickel to the world. It's positioning itself as the clean nickel powerhouse that both Europe and the United States desperately need. For Detroit, this isn't a theoretical policy problem. It's a direct threat to America's EV ambitions, its trade strategy, and even its national security posture.
At the center of the story is Canada Nickel Company, the Toronto-based developer behind the Crawford Nickel project near Timmins, Ontario. This is not a routine mining proposal. Analysts at Corporate Knights described Crawford as one of the largest new nickel opportunities anywhere on the planet, a massive, low-carbon operation designed from the beginning to supply battery metals for North America's clean technology industries. Reuters reported as early as 2021 that Canada Nickel had already been in discussions with senior U.S. officials about serving as a secure supplier for the American electric vehicle sector. Back then, the conversation was forward-looking. Today, it has become an urgent strategic reality. Crawford's development timeline now intersects directly with the world scrambling to secure stable mineral supply, with the U.S. under Trump slapping broad metal and battery tariffs on virtually every trading partner, including Canada. This is the environment in which Mark Carney dropped his new federal budget, a document that places critical minerals at the core of Canada's economic and geopolitical strategy. Billions are being committed to mining, refining, and value-added production inside Canada. Ottawa is no longer content with simply digging resources out of the ground and shipping them south. Carney wants domestic refining, domestic upgrading, and domestic control over Canada's most valuable strategic assets. All of this lands at the exact moment when the United States, under Trump's revived America First doctrine, is tightening trade restrictions on metals, batteries, and EV components. The collision between Carney's critical minerals strategy and Trump's tariff strategy is not the coincidence. It is the defining economic clash of the decade.
Nickel is the metal everyone in Washington talks about behind closed doors. Without it, there are no long-range batteries. There are no high-performance electric SUVs, and there is no American claim to leadership in the next industrial revolution. The U.S. hasn't built a reliable domestic nickel supply chain in decades. For years, it quietly leaned on imports from Canada, which historically provided more than a third of America's entire supply of primary nickel. When Trump decided to impose tariffs of 20 to 30% on imported battery metals, he wasn't just going after Indonesia or China. He was hitting the very country that keeps Detroit's battery factories alive. That's where the new problem begins. If the U.S. cuts itself off from Canadian nickel, it doesn't fall back on some abundant American resource. It falls back on Indonesia, where Chinese refiners dominate the industry, and where the environmental footprint is so high that any vehicle built with that nickel will face punishing carbon penalties in Europe once the EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism fully kicks in. In other words, Trump's tariffs risk forcing American automakers to choose between paying more at home or paying more abroad. Either way, the EV becomes more expensive and less competitive.
What makes Crawford so disruptive is not just its size, but the quality and strategic value of its nickel. This is clean, low-carbon metal that global automakers desperately need as emission standards tighten. Its production profile puts Canada in a category almost no other supplier can match, and Carney understands how critical that timing is. By placing critical mineral processing and value-added production at the center of his budget, Carney is elevating nickel from a commodity into a national strategic asset. Canada is signaling that it will move up the value chain. Instead of being the continent's ore pit, it intends to be the continent's refinery, upgrader, and long-term supplier of choice. This shift gives Ottawa real influence, the kind of influence Canada rarely had in previous decades. The consequences for Washington are immediate. If the U.S. pushes too hard with tariffs, Canada has the option to redirect supply toward Europe, South Korea, and Japan. Those markets are aggressively locking in clean nickel contracts and are already preparing their industrial strategies around low-carbon inputs. Every ton that Canada signs away to the EU or Asia is a ton the United States cannot easily replace, especially if it wants to avoid Chinese-dominated supply chains.
Trump cannot ignore this because nickel touches every strategic sector the U.S. is trying to protect. The EV industry is just one piece. Nickel is crucial for military jet engines, naval systems, advanced alloys used in aerospace, and even high-density grid storage. A shortage here isn't like a shortage of lumber or furniture. It is a shortage that affects national security, international competitiveness, and America's long-term technological leadership. And the timeline matters. The U.S. is heading into the 2026 USMCA review with Trump demanding concessions from Canada and Mexico. Carney now walks into that negotiation with something Canada hasn't had in decades: leverage. Canada controls the most attractive nickel project in the G7, backed by a federal government that is openly investing in processing capacity and openly engaging with European and Asian partners. If Trump wants to keep American EV manufacturing alive, he needs Canadian nickel. If he wants to export those EVs into the EU without facing carbon penalties, he needs clean Canadian nickel. If he wants to reduce dependence on China, he needs a non-Chinese supply chain, and Canada is the only scalable option. This isn't resource nationalism, it's geopolitical realism, and Trump knows it. What Mark Carney has done is simple but powerful. He has turned nickel into a national advantage, and he has done it at the exact moment when the U.S. is most vulnerable to supply chain shocks. Canada isn't trying to pick a fight with the United States, but it is no longer willing to play the role of passive supplier while Washington weaponizes tariffs against its own allies. The question now is whether Trump will adapt or escalate. Will the U.S. choose stable cooperation on critical minerals, or will protectionism push America into deeper dependence on China and higher costs at home? And more importantly, if Canada's nickel becomes the key to North America's EV future, who really holds the leverage in the next chapter of U.S.-Canada relations? Canada has already made its move. Now the world waits to see how Washington responds.
Canada now really looking to China as America seems like an unfriendly trading partner at this point.
Donald Trump shutting down talks on trade with Canada. He's driving so much of the Western world into the arms of China, because if he's going to deny us access to the U.S. market, well, we got to go where there are buyers, and China is the largest physical market in the world.
Trump wanted to punish Canada, but ended up pushing the whole Western world toward China. In the fall of 2025, what started as a personal clash between Donald Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has quietly become one of the biggest geopolitical shifts of the decade. By shutting down trade talks with Canada and imposing sweeping tariffs across allied economies, Trump has done something few American presidents ever managed. He has driven his closest partners to look east. Canada's new outreach to Asia, Europe's revived trade with Beijing, and Japan's quiet expansion of mineral deals with China all trace back to one man's belief that punishment creates strength. But what Trump didn't see is that isolation creates a vacuum, and China is moving to fill it. The moment of rupture came in early October. Trump halted all trade discussions with Canada after a television ad from Ontario mocked his tariff policies. Ottawa didn't react with outrage, it pivoted. Within days, Carney's team was in Asia, setting up talks that would include a private meeting with President Xi Jinping. For Canada, this wasn't a sudden shift. The U.S. now treats even its neighbors as competitors, with tariffs on autos, metals, and lumber, driving up costs and straining jobs on both sides of the border. Faced with that reality, Carney chose a different path, to expand Canada's export network beyond North America. At home, political commentators like Scott Reed called it from the frying pan into the fire. Canada was leaving one difficult partner for another. But the decision was about survival, not ideology. When the largest economy in the world shuts its door, a middle power like Canada must find another one open. Canada is not alone in this realignment. Across Europe and Asia, governments once firmly anchored to Washington are testing new trade routes. After Trump's 25 to 35% import tariffs took effect in mid-2025, European leaders began reopening dialogues with Beijing to stabilize industrial supply chains. Japan quietly expanded its export of battery minerals to China through new port deals in Yokohama and Dalian. South Korea's businesses, long dependent on the American consumer market, signed fresh contracts with Chinese electric component buyers worth billions. Each of these countries had signed separate trade frameworks with Washington earlier in 2025, the EU in August, Japan in September, and South Korea in October, but none trusted them as lasting. Trump's willingness to cancel or suspend talks without notice left allies wondering who might be next. For them, engagement with China was not enthusiasm, it was insurance. Trump's America First doctrine was built on the idea that pressure produces compliance. Using tariffs as his main instrument, he demanded that partners move production to the United States and accept American-defined terms of access. It worked in the short run. Some factories returned, job numbers in select states improved, and the White House celebrated every new headline about reshoring. But diplomacy doesn't run on fear for long. When the president cut off negotiations with Ottawa after an ad on Canadian television, it sent a global signal that economic partnership with Washington could turn personal overnight. For decades, American strength depended on predictable alliances: NATO for defense, USMCA for trade, G7 for coordination. By replacing reliability with volatility, Trump transformed allies into self-protective actors. They still value U.S. markets, but no longer trust U.S. policy. China has been quick to seize the opening. Its Ministry of Commerce reported in late September that trade with Western economies rose 12% year-over-year, even as tensions with Washington deepened. Canada's own export data show rising interest in agricultural and energy shipments to Asia, particularly through Pacific ports in British Columbia. For Beijing, it's an easy calculation. The more unpredictable Trump becomes, the more foreign capital and attention drift toward China's stability. For Western capitals, the calculation is much harder. Doing business with China means lower costs and larger markets, but also dependence on a rival that controls rare earth exports and monitors foreign investment. The G7 nations don't trust China, but they also can't live without its market. That uneasy balance defines the new global economy, engagement driven not by faith, but by survival. This is the dilemma Carney now faces. Moving toward China offers economic relief, but political risk. Canada still remembers the 2018 detention of the two Michaels and Beijing's retaliatory tariffs on canola. Yet in a world where the U.S. is no longer a predictable buyer, the alternative is shrinking growth. Throughout the confrontation, Carney has chosen composure over confrontation. When Trump exploded over the Ontario ad, Canada didn't respond with counter-tariffs or speeches. Instead, the government focused on new partnerships, a $300 billion export expansion plan with Asia, and upcoming trade talks with the Philippines under the ASEAN framework. This strategy reflects a shift in tone. Canada no longer defines its economic policy by how Washington reacts. It defines it by where Canadian companies can grow. Observers in Ottawa see Carney's diplomacy as patient, almost technocratic. While Trump governs by impulse, Carney governs by balance. By refusing to escalate, he has positioned Canada as the adult in the room, the partner willing to work with anyone who respects the rules of trade, even if that means sitting across from Beijing. The ripple effects of Trump's tariffs are now visible across the global economy. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the World Trade Organization have both warned that prolonged tariffs risk raising consumer prices and destabilizing supply chains. By October 2025, U.S. inflation was hovering near 5%, with energy and vehicle costs among the biggest drivers. Meanwhile, China's share of global trade in manufactured goods reached a record 31%, according to IMF data, its highest since 2020. Europe and Asia are quietly rebuilding connections that bypass American oversight. The West is not abandoning the U.S., but it is diversifying away from it. In practice, that means more Chinese financing for infrastructure in Europe, more Canadian grain shipped to Asian ports, and more Asian investors buying stakes in Western resource projects. What Trump saw as punishment for disobedience has become the fuel for a new economic alignment, one where China, not America, sits at the center. Trump wanted to punish Canada, but ended up pushing the whole Western world toward China.
By using tariffs as weapons and temper as strategy, he has fractured the alliances that once gave America its leverage. Canada's pivot to Asia is not betrayal, it is adaptation. Europe's outreach to Beijing is not admiration, it is necessity. And as each country looks for stability beyond Washington, the balance of power tilts further toward the east. History shows that when America isolates its friends, it strengthens its rivals. What we're witnessing in 2025 is not just a trade dispute, it's a redrawing of global trust. If this continues, the century that began as America's could quietly end as China's.
The country would rather not have to pay $100,000, but they'd rather, how do you do that? You hire Americans.
It really just makes me hesitant to consider working in the U.S., makes me want to explore opportunities in other countries outside of the U.S. and definitely looking at Canada.
Recent grads are not, will not be in a position to be able to justify that $100K upfront that the visa is going to require.
Could Trump's new H-1B visa fee push top talent to Canada? That question is being asked in lecture halls, startup incubators, and boardrooms across North America. In late September 2025, President Donald Trump signed a proclamation that fundamentally reshapes America's approach to high-skilled immigration. At the heart of this shift is a $100,000 annual fee for the H-1B visa, the work permit that has allowed hundreds of thousands of engineers, software developers, and scientists to build their careers in the United States. Alongside it, the administration unveiled a so-called gold card visa costing $1 million and a platinum card for $5 million, framed as luxury pathways to U.S. residency. Trump argues that these measures will protect American jobs and wages by discouraging companies from hiring cheaper foreign labor. Yet, as the policy begins to ripple across the economy, questions are mounting. Will this actually safeguard employment at home, or will it undermine America's long-standing advantage in global talent? Early signs suggest that Canada, America's closest neighbor and competitor, may be the unexpected winner. The H-1B program has long been a cornerstone of U.S. innovation. It grants temporary work authorization to foreign professionals in specialized fields such as engineering, information technology, biotechnology, and finance. For decades, U.S. companies have relied on it to fill talent shortages. According to U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, more than 70% of H-1B petitions in recent years have been filed on behalf of workers from India and China. For big tech companies, the H-1B is not optional. Microsoft, Google, and Amazon all recruit heavily from universities and research labs abroad, and they bring in top graduates from Canadian schools, such as the University of Waterloo. Since the 1990s, Waterloo has sent as many as 1 in 10 of its graduates south each year, supplying Silicon Valley with a steady pipeline of software engineers. By attaching a $100,000 annual fee to this process, Trump's new rule creates an economic filter. While trillion-dollar giants like Amazon and Google may still pay the cost, early-stage startups simply cannot. Venture capital-backed firms that once dreamed of hiring the brightest global minds will now face a barrier they cannot climb. In practice, this means America risks losing the very ecosystem of entrepreneurial dynamism that has defined its global leadership in technology.
The most immediate consequence is uncertainty. For students finishing graduate degrees in artificial intelligence or cybersecurity, the new fee changes the calculus of moving to the U.S. dramatically. Many say they cannot justify the idea of a six-figure annual cost attached to their employment. This policy also strikes at startups. Each year, roughly 85,000 new H-1B visas are issued, but small firms will now find themselves priced out. Big tech can absorb the cost, but smaller innovators cannot. Analysts already warn that some U.S. companies may shift development work to India or expand their research teams in Canada, where the visa landscape is less restrictive. For Canada, the opening could not be clearer. Universities like Waterloo already rank among the top training grounds for global technology talent. Each year, hundreds of its graduates weigh offers from Silicon Valley. With the new H-1B fee, many will now look closer to home. Cities such as Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal are already thriving tech hubs, supported by Canada's Global Talent Stream program, which can process skilled visas in as little as 2 weeks. Prime Minister Mark Carney has described this moment as a great opportunity for Canada. While his government has not yet unveiled a detailed strategy, the political message is clear. Canada can market itself as the open, affordable alternative to the United States. With express entry, the startup visa, and generous pathways for permanent residency, Canada already offers a friendlier environment for ambitious young engineers and scientists. The difference is particularly sharp for startups. Canadian firms raising their first rounds of venture capital no longer face the same disadvantage in recruiting against Silicon Valley. Instead, they can argue that staying in Canada avoids the crushing cost of the H-1B. For the first time in decades, the talent equation may tilt north rather than south. Trump's policy was designed to protect American workers, yet in practice, it risks weakening the very sectors that power the U.S. economy. High-skilled immigrants are not displacing local workers. They fill gaps in areas where domestic supply is insufficient and generate new companies, patents, and tax revenues. By discouraging their arrival, the U.S. could see an erosion of its innovation base. Canada, meanwhile, stands to gain by keeping more of its graduates and attracting talent from abroad. If even a fraction of these workers redirect their ambitions toward Toronto or Vancouver, the economic impact will be significant. America may end up with fewer engineers in Seattle, while Canada becomes stronger in Waterloo and Toronto. Adding to the confusion is the legal landscape. Immigration lawyers have already filed challenges arguing that such an extreme fee exceeds the executive branch's authority. Courts may ultimately block or modify the policy, but the damage to confidence has been done. For companies weighing where to build their next research center, the perception of instability matters as much as the actual rule. Meanwhile, Congress is signaling a willingness to revisit the rules for both H-1B and L-1 visas. Bipartisan senators have introduced bills aimed at reform. This creates a climate of unpredictability. For firms making multi-year investments, uncertainty about visa costs is itself a deterrent. Big tech is lobbying heavily against the change, arguing that curbing skilled immigration hands advantage to rivals abroad. Whether they succeed or not, the episode shows how immigration has become a flashpoint in Trump's second term. Looking ahead, the stakes are not small. The global race for talent is intensifying. The European Union is expanding its blue card system. Australia continues to offer streamlined visas for skilled workers. If the United States erects barriers while others lower them, the balance of power in innovation could shift. Canada's opportunity is especially strong because of proximity. For workers who once dreamed of Silicon Valley, Toronto offers a comparable tech scene with easier access. Major U.S. firms already operate large campuses in Canada, from Google in Kitchener-Waterloo to Amazon in Vancouver. If Washington makes it harder to bring talent into the U.S., those same firms can simply expand north of the border. The broader picture is that talent, like capital, flows to where it is treated best. In the 21st century, economic power will be determined less by who controls trade routes or resources and more by who attracts the best minds. On that front, the United States risks trading away its edge. So what does this all add up to? A policy designed to defend American jobs may end up exporting them. By attaching a $100,000 annual fee to the H-1B, Trump has placed a toll booth on the highway of global talent. While the intention is to slow the flow, the result may be to reroute it. Canada, with its open arms and lower barriers, could be the beneficiary. Universities, startups, and entire cities may find themselves enriched by talent that once would have gone south. For the U.S., the longer this policy stands, the greater the risk of falling behind in the only competition that truly matters in the modern economy, the competition for human capital. Trump promised to put America first, yet in the arena of innovation, this move may put America second. Could Trump's new H-1B visa fee push top talent to Canada? The answer is becoming clearer every day. This is not just an immigration story. It is a story of economic strategy, and it may be remembered as one of the most consequential backfires of his presidency.